Hello and welcome to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. And in this episode, we're focusing on Slovakia, a small country in the middle of Eastern Europe, the junior and less well-known partner in the former Republic of Czechoslovakia. Also a geographical pivot point, which has been through its history surrounded by more powerful neighbours. The Kingdom of Hungary to the south, Poland to the north, Russians and Ukrainians to the east. And though Slovakia has been influenced by many of these, it also has its own particular traditions and history. Yenni grew up in the eastern corner of Slovakia from a Hungarian family, but learned to speak Slovak and Russian, as well as her native language. As a child in World War II and growing up in the post-war socialist Republic of Czechoslovakia, she experienced a period of historic change and dramatic events in the country, culminating in what's known as the Prague Spring of 68-69, which led to Soviet tanks rumbling into her hometown of Kosice. This was the trigger for Yenni and her family, like many in the country at the time, to take the fateful decision to try and escape to Vienna, Austria, and see if they could gain asylum in Australia. I hope you will join me in listening to this evocative personal perspective on this era of history for which there are ever fewer witnesses, and to understand what it was like for an Eastern European migrant arriving in 1970s Hobart.
So I'm Jenny Williams. I'm coming from that part of the world which has had very dramatic and exciting experiences. I am from that part of Slovakia which borders with Hungary. The city I'm coming from used to be part of the monarchy. In 1918 became part of First Czechoslovakian Republic. In 1936 it became back to Hungary during the German occupation up to 1945, and then we were liberated by the Russians. So we became Czechoslovakia again, second Czechoslovakia. So my family is of Hungarian origin. The native language I have learned was Hungarian, and when we became Czechoslovakian, I was schooled in Czechoslovakia with Slovak language and Russian. And I use those languages frequently. I happen to be the first generation of socialists, youth, and I had no bad feelings about Russian occupation, despite the fact that my grandparents who were in business, their business was nationalized, and they had bad feelings about the socialist regime. But I have benefited with a very good education and lots of activities, sport and culture activities, which were for free for us. And so I had a very good childhood and very good teenage years, really. The problem started. Really, it wasn't a problem. I got married, I had 2 children. I took my husband to join the Communist Party because I thought it was a good thing to do. And I was working just before we left the country. I was working in the social department, and I was the secretary to Invalid Committee, which would be the equivalent here of the Invalid Committee it was. And my role was to look into the files and the lives of all the clients who came and applied for the invalid pension. Mm-hmm. So I have learned a lot about people, had a very good relationship, and I was working in that position for 10 years, and I loved it. Things have changed in 1968. 21st of August, when we were occupied, our country was occupied by USSR and the Warsaw Pact Army.
That was to do with the Prague Spring?
It was about the Dubcek and Prague Spring. It was preceded with a very dramatic and exhilarating dice where we thought that there is kind of freedom which we never really experienced. But I do understand now why we were occupied by the USSR, because we were part of the chain which was not only a political change, but it was also the whole economic change. And Czechoslovakia was right in the middle of it, because Czechoslovakia is surrounded by Poland, by Ukraine, by Hungary, by Austria and Germany. Mm-hmm. And so, we were very pivotal country to sort of being in there. We didn't know what was happening when we were occupied. It was a day when the aeroplanes kept circling around us and we had no idea what was happening. And the next day, my mom went to work and she phoned me back and she said, "Do you know that the whole city is full of Russian tanks?" And this is how I find out that we were occupied. Turn on the television and we find out then about the Prague and all the dramatic things which has happened. But prior to that, on the morning at 4 o'clock, the phone rang in our place, and my husband's cousin was working as a dispatch guy in some kind of car company, autobus or something company, and he said, "I don't know what is happening, but the tanks are pouring in through the east from Russia to Kosice." So we thought that there was something, and we knew about Prague Spring. Anyway, when we find out all about this, it was very dramatic, because there was some shooting in the city. I didn't go to work for about a week, and I was trying to find out where I will hide with the children. But to the end, I went back to work, and because of the place, it was like a city council, my workplace. It was surrounded by tanks with all the Russian soldiers sitting in the turrets playing harmonica, and people from the office went down to them, and because we were taught Russian, basically, we could communicate with them. They thought that they were in West Germany, that they suppressing uprising, which didn't happen. But I'm not talking about places like Prague and that, because they had a different experience. But this is my experience, and I'm saying it as it happened to me. Anyway, they were sitting in tanks in front of the radio station and hospital and all the sort of pivotal places in the city. And so far it was not too bad. But as I was talking to people I knew, there was always less and less of them in the city, and they were escaping because some of the borders were very porous at that time. They didn't clamp down just yet. Anyway, we decided that we'll see what happens, but then the boss of the person who was in charge of our department arrested. He was in his office with 2 Russian soldiers at his door and all that. It was starting to get very threatening, and the people were told not to go to the streets, and the Russian tanks going around. So I have here a little write-up about how it went. It was too much. In the second half of 1968 and the first of 1969, the sharp edge of circumstances were turning in my sinews and bones, wanting to tear out my heart so it remembers nothing of the painful and heart-wrenching memories. Those memories which started at the night when tanks four abreast were rolling through the dark streets with shut-down turrets and guns pointed to the sky like remote-control toys, with a deep and constant noise that echoed in the asphalted streets when they were being torn open like can of sardines between the 4, 6 or 12-story flats. I'm Yenni, and it was I who thought it all out. No future for us and our children in this country after the occupation by USSR. No prospect of keeping our jobs, no university studies for children, no security. Only tanks with Russian soldiers sitting in turrets with their Katyushkas at the ready. There were 7 of us, 4 adults and 3 children. My mother, whom we called Mommy, Chirpy, my sister 6 years my junior, and her 1-year-old son Roman, my husband Jano, myself, and our 2 children Istvan and Zsuzsi. All together in February 1969 we escaped illegally from the country behind the Iron Curtains, then called Czechoslovakia. Before our departure, we read the pamphlets about Australian way of life, which we were sent by a friend who had already escaped, and he got them from Australian embassy in Vienna. We compared the minimum wages, the housing, the schooling, the prices, and the freedom. We were well informed, even worked out after all our weekly shopping of grocery and adding some small luxuries, we still would have $5 saved from our minimum wages. $5 whole. What a country, I thought. We thought about it all and about the luxury of vast possibilities. The decision of emigrate is a complex issue. Emotional, political, financial, and moral questions had to be considered. And they were, what will be the moral and financial consequences for my mother to leave her job as a legal advisor to a large wholesale firm? For my sister to leave her teaching position and for me to give up my position of secretary to the Invalid Committee. And for my husband, who had 150 people working under him. All right, I argued. I know there will be insecurities, unknown problems, and problems with the language, but the hardest part surely had to be to get over the borders. Once we are safe in a free country, this will be good. A little hardship for a short while, that's all. We are all healthy, well-meaning, and hard-working people. That belief and my capability to voice my opinion with a self-confidence and assuredness helped. They all listened and believed in the picture I painted about our bright future. One cold winter morning, when the snow was heavily weighing down the bare branches of trees and the streets looked like enchanted fairy tale, we turned the key in the door of our flat on the 2nd floor in the block of flats and carried the 3 suitcases, which from then on represented all our belongings, to a railway station where we caught the train to Vienna. I might never see this city again. I might never feel the familiarity of the cramped bus, the exchange of smiles, the murmur of conversation mingled with humming of the engine. The thought left me cool and indifferent. It doesn't matter. It's in the past already. I don't belong to this crowd anymore. I look on the white streets with my eyes, but my mind is excited about tomorrow and the days after tomorrow. Somewhere, it's all between my eyes and my brain. I don't give my heart a chance to express its feelings, and I make a conscious effort not to be sentimental. It's unforgettable, and there are no words to express those feelings. My grandma walks me out to the front gate, the familiar dress, the familiar pinned-up white hair, and the familiar brown eyes, now full of sorrow. Look after the children, Yenni. Look, Yenni is my native name. Look after them well. She grips my arm. I feel her warm, wet cheek against mine. The very last touch and the very last memory of my grandmother makes me sad. On the train at the Hungarian and Slovak border crossing. The brakes screech. I have crossed this border many times, but never so nervously as today. Naively, we think that to cross this border will be the hardest part of the whole emigration. If we appear suspicious, they could return us to Czechoslovakia. We keep looking through the window, the flat country is covered with snow. 2 men, one in Hungarian blue-gray, the other in Slovak khaki, checks the passport. This is all they do. They are impersonal and polite. The passports are in order. How much money are we taking with us, they inquire. Just what is written in the passport declaration, I say. The Hungarian presses a rubber stamp on the page 12 of each passport, touches his head, and they both leave. Through the window we see men in uniform with guns hanging from their shoulders and sniffer dogs at their heels walking on the platform. A group of 4 men enters the carriage. All suitcases and bags down from the overhead net, please. Our heads stretch and struggle with their weight as we lower them onto the seat. Open them, please. They move their hands among the contents of our cases and stick their arms deep into our bags. So, where are we going with children? Just visiting an aunt in Vienna, I say. They sigh. The children are stuck to me on each side, and I'm sweating. Chirpy, my sister, stands in the middle of the compartment holding Roman on her arms. Roman behaves in exemplary manner. 2 of the men step back, keeping the door open. The other 2 kneel on the floor looking under seats with torches. I feel threatened. We don't dare to talk. Is it over or is there more? After 30 minutes the train is still not moving. There is a sudden traffic in front of our window. More soldiers goes on the train. Did they find something? Another 30 minutes. Soldiers are walking about in front of our compartment. Did they get someone off the train? We are still not talking. The train starts moving. My hand slides into the pocket of my skirt, searching for my handkerchief. I wipe the pearls of sweat about my lip and exchange a smile with my sister. I falsified most of my documents, and This is why I was so very, very nervous. Because, this is how I got the passports anyway, and for all 7 of us. We arrived to Vienna and we thought that we perhaps would like to go somewhere else, not to Australia, but to maybe to Canada or to America. Well, the people in the hotel advised not to go to American embassy because it's a very long process. People were waiting there for years really to get the sort of entry thing. But the charity, which was provided by the Christian charity, there was a lady who was living in the hotel. They got hold of some forms from the Canadian embassy to fill up and apply for asylum. And that lady was selling it in the hotel, and our last money would have gone there if she would have got it, if she would have had enough of those forms. But when she left for Canada, we find out that they were all expired, and the Canadian embassy said that whoever came with those falsified sort of documents, they can't ever go to Canada.
All right.
And she had the money. Anyway, we arrived to Australia, and after we did, it was incredible. Our impressions were so varied and so incredible. It was exciting because it was a new country and a new environment.
And was Hobart the first place you came to in Australia?
Yes, we finished up in Hobart. We were going to go to Bonegilla, but because my mother and sister were assigned to Tasmania, they decided it. I don't know how they decided it, but it happened on the aeroplane, and the guy spoke German, and my mom spoke German, and she kept saying, family, together. So we finished up in Tasmania then, and we had uncle here who also helped us to settle first. So this is what happened. They were dramatic days. When we came first to Australia, we were looking for a job, and in early 1970s, it wasn't hard. You really walked into any job you were capable of doing. But because I didn't speak English, I didn't have much hope. Someone told us to go to Cadbury's, that they hire people, so I did. We did, really. We always went in packs, my husband, my mother, my sister, because we were hoping that one of us will be employed anyway. So my husband got the first day when he applied, he got a job in silk and textile. And my mother was looking after the children, and I went to Cadbury's, and hated it, absolutely hated it. And I find out they told me to go to public place to work, to learn the language. And as it happened, they spoke all Russian. They were all Russian and Polish immigrants. So my Russian improved fantastically, no English. Eventually I finished up with a Hungarian guy who started to introduce yogurt in Hobart, and not many people knew about yogurt. He had a little yogurt factory down in Lena Valley, next to the milk factory. And so I started 4:30 in the morning, and we didn't have a car, so he would pick me up at 4:30 from where we lived, and I finished at 5 o'clock. But it was good, because we act Hungarian all day, and he was very good, and every time he had a chance, he packed a full box of yogurts and cheese, cottage cheese and stuff, so it helped us, the family helped. After that, oh yes, one day he came and he said, "Yenni, what do you know about chemistry?" I said, "Oh, I matriculated from chemistry." And so he lit a cigarette, he went to the laboratory of Baker's milk and came back, and he said, "They want you for interview. There is a place in, in the laboratory for laboratory assistant." So I went. I went for an interview, and the guy who interviewed me couldn't speak Slovak or Hungarian or Russian, and I couldn't speak English. So I was just guessing what he was asking, and my answers were yes, no, but what I was thinking that it is right, and came back to my working place, which was behind the laboratory, and my boss asked, "So how did you go?" I said, "No idea." So he lit another cigarette, went up, and he came back and he said, "You are hired." I said, "You joking?" I didn't think so. Anyway, I did get hired, and I was working there for 10 years. I got my qualification as laboratory analyst, and I was basically running the whole show, really. And it was fabulous, the best time of my life. First 3 months, we couldn't speak, so we drew pictures to each other. My boss in the laboratory, he drew a picture, what he wanted me to do, and I did. And half of the factory people who were bringing samples in from the production, they all got pencils, they drew pictures what they want, and I drew pictures back, and this is how we communicated. The people were marvelous. The people were absolutely marvelous, not resentful at all, wanting to share, wanting to introduce the Australian way of life. One of the guys from the factory, behind the factory, lit up a little barbecue thing, and he got sausages and tomatoes and all that, and turned up on the paper plate, and he said, "Australian barbecue!" Beautiful, beautiful. The best part of my settling in Australia, really, 10 years I was working there, and then I opened my own business, which was just as good as this. So
I was interested to know from that, how did you eventually manage to acquire
the language?
Yeah.
I copied people the way they talk. For a long time, I didn't know what it means. People were saying, "See ya," and I didn't know what it means, so I said, "See ya," and then they answered, that was good, and someone explained to me later that it is "see you later." I said, "Oh, I didn't know that." I was copying the language. I don't have any education. I haven't learned the language at school. I haven't been doing any courses. I did. For the first week, we were sent to a Hobart Matric for English courses, and they were all the migrants. They were Vietnamese, Chileans. There was a lot of Chileans escaping in early 70s from their uprising, and all those people. And we learned first day, everyone would say, "I am." Repeat. So the class repeated, "I am." "You are," and so on. And so I knew those 3 things. And the next time we turned up, new migrants came. So she started again. I am. You are. So this was my English education.
Obviously coming to Australia would have been a big adjustment. What did you find were maybe the biggest or the most noticeable cultural differences that you came across?
They weren't sort of such an obvious things. It's mainly when the children were growing up and they grew up in Australian culture because they were schooled here. I saw them that they were more... I find interesting that the families are not extended families.
Yeah.
I got to know a lady and she told me that her sister lives in Devonport and she hasn't seen her for years. I said, why?
Yeah.
And she said, she lives in Devonport. I couldn't believe it. To me, it was the family was always family. It was a very important part. The independence of teenagers, I find, I was worried about it because my son suddenly became very independent when he was 16, 17, and he would turn up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting at the door waiting for him to get home. And when he did, I felt safe, and then, I told him, but Mom, everyone does it. Where were you? We had a party. And Mom, you are so old-fashioned. So, this the big freedom of the teenagers, I find. Also, I was told at school that the children were 2 years ahead of the curriculum of Australian.
Right.
And I thought, Stephen was 12 and the daughter was 9. And they were 2 years ahead of the curriculum. And I thought, that's a big difference. The teacher told me, when I barely could speak English, that it would be best if we forget about our own language but talk English at home. And I thought, how would that be done?
That's someone who doesn't really understand the realities of
Someone told me that I should go to education department of somewhere. I can't even remember, but I know that there was a lady. I walked into the department and she said, how old are you? I said, I am 38. And she said, you're too old.
Wow.
And I thought, you kidding? Because you see, in our country after the war, most men were in war and the women were working in offices everywhere, really, mainly women. And they were, I was working in the office prior to the social department, and there were people 65, 70, I didn't think much of it. They knew their jobs, they have been working in their jobs for years, and they went home, they took care of the family, they cooked, they did everything. So I find that a little bit off-putting. I thought, And then I went down the street in Hobart, and there was some building going on, and someone whistled at me, and I thought, finally someone recognized me, I'm a person. No, it would be an insult, but then I felt so good.
So how long before you could sort of communicate in a sort of competent way, I guess, or in a way you were comfortable with?
Might be 3 or 4 years after I started working in Baker's Mill. They sent me to get my qualification as a laboratory analyst because I had the basic qualification for chemistry, but I haven't been taught about the milk and all that. So I was given this English book of 200 pages to learn, and what I did at that time, I was working for Baker's Milk. Finished at 5 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock I started at the townhouse, which is now something mid-city hotel or something, washing up dishes. And I came back at midnight. I would put the heater on, and I would get the dictionary and word by word translated 200 pages of English into Slovak. I read it and I thought, oh, so this is what it is. I learned it in Slovak and tried to translate it back to English. And through that I have learned how to spell, how to speak. My vocabulary grew, of course. And I went to Launceston for exams. And I passed 90-something. And I thought, by then I could communicate. But prior to that, it didn't really worry me that I couldn't speak English, because the people were so helpful and so trying to help me to talk that I didn't feel threatened, or I didn't feel lesser, or I didn't. And what is funny, I never really was homesick. I never was homesick. I always was very grateful for this, what we got, and how, because I always think that the people make the place and the people made this place.
Yeah, and I guess having that would really help. Because the issue for some migrants is a feeling of isolation and not knowing anybody and not knowing how to connect. So if you can get those people connect with you, or you connect with people, it really makes your whole life very different.
And I have met many of our countrymen who were very unhappy, and some of them even returned back to Czechoslovakia.
I'd go back a little bit to where you grew up.
Yes.
Because you said you lived in Kosice, but also in a smaller place before that?
It was during the war. You see, Kosice was part of Hungary when I was growing up.
Okay.
And my father was director of an insurance company which had the headquarters in Miskolc, which was in Hungary. But it is only one hour train drive. And because it was one country, we were going backwards and forwards. But when the war started and my father went back to, he was in the army, he was mobilized. Mom decided, my sister was 2 years old or 1 year old, decided to go back to her parents, to Kosice, and this is where we stayed. But because the headquarters of the Germans was just a stone throw away from where we lived, from that house, she was worried. So my grandfather knew an old priest in a little village, which was Somogyi, and it's about an hour train drive to. Now it's still in Czechoslovakia or Slovakia. And we moved into the parish. And that was a beautiful part of my childhood, because on the first day, the children, automatically took me as a friend, and I was a rarity because I came from a big city. And it was a fantastic and very idyllic life, because the war didn't reach that village just yet. Later on it was bombed, but when we were there it wasn't. On the mornings about 4 or 5 o'clock, the cows were, with cow herd would go to the main street with a bell, and he was sort of herding all the cows from all the doors, gates which were open, and took them up to the sort of hills for a day, and at 6 o'clock the whole procession started when he was bringing back the cows. So every morning it just, that's a memory which stays in my brain, and I still can hear, and I can almost smell those cows. And we were involved in home chores like churning butter, like making popcorns, like taking food to the people who were working in the fields, mainly women, because the men were in the war. So, I like it, but then we heard that the Germans were coming through the villages, and then some of the villages were burned and all that. So Mom packed us up and she took us back to Kosice, and then we lived in the preparation for the war. We were running to the cellar, and to the end we finished up living in the cellar with the families, 6 or 8 families there for 6 weeks. But when you are a child, and when you have your mother there and she holds your hands, you feel secure. You don't feel that terrible things which were happening in the city. I later on find out that they were rounding up all the underground workers and were hanging them on the lampposts in the middle of the city. I didn't know anything about it. We were living in the cellar. We were let out for 1 hour to run around in the fresh air and back to cellar, and someone was cooking the dinner, and someone was telling us stories, and someone was singing. So, it wasn't too bad, really, as a child. I'm talking, what was I, 6 years, 7 years old, so...
You mentioned that, the area where you lived had been part of Hungary and has probably changed around a bit. So I'm guessing that there was kind of a cultural mix of Slovaks and Hungarians.
Yes, always has been, because it was part of the big monarchy, and there were, at that time, part of Ukraine was also Hungary, and part of Poland was also Hungary.
Yeah.
So people moved around, and what was interesting, they kept their own culture and their own language. So we spoke the dialect of the village people as well, which was kind of, they called them Rusniaks. It was a little bit of Russian and a little bit of Slovak. When we were given back to Czechoslovakia, it was a little bit dramatic, because we were forced not to speak Hungarian, and I didn't experience it, but many people did, that there were fights on the streets, to make the Hungarians speak Slovak. But we just, I went to bed as a Hungarian and woke up as Slovak without making any steps, and went to school, which was all Slovak. I had no idea what was going on. And it took me, not all that much really, but, at least half a year to realize what the language is. I refused to read Slovak books. Mom kept getting me Slovak books. I refused it. And I still spoke Hungarian. The language at home was Hungarian. But then I made friends, and you blend in. And I'm really grateful for those two cultures, because they are very different from each other, language-wise and culture-wise and mentality-wise as well.
Were there any Slovak traditions or Hungarian traditions as well that you missed here, or that you couldn't, experience here?
Well, I miss the Christmas with white snow, that's for sure. I couldn't believe it that we are, walking the street, and it was middle of the summer, and all the shop windows were displaying snow scenes, and I just couldn't believe it. I thought, why don't they display what they really do in Christmas? So I missed that. Some of the food I missed. Like bread, I used to buy in delicatessen rye bread, which was coming from Melbourne once a week, so I buy that.
On Slovak traditions, I read about a strange Easter tradition in Slovakia. I don't know whether this is was a case in your area where the men throw water at the...
Oh, yes, yes. Well, that's it. Yeah, that's a sprinkling dye. It's not only Slovakia, Hungary as well. Okay. So it's a very... In our parts, the Czech, they have a different tradition, but the Slovaks and the Hungarians, they have the same tradition. What happens on the Easter Monday, they go to people and the villages are different, but in the city, the men and the boys buy a little perfume, the cheapest one possibly, and they go from one house to the other where they know that they are girls, and they put a little bit of drop of that perfume on the head of the housewife and the girls, and for that they are invited in, and all the leftovers from the Saturday evening feast, they are hosted, and they sit around the table and have a glass of wine, and by the night they all just, luckily they don't drive, and they all just wobble through the street. So this is the tradition, that's a sprinkling dye. In villages, It's a little bit more dramatic. I was in one of the Slovak villages over one of the Easters, and they chased the girls to the nearest creek, and they, dip them in, and it's all a tradition I grew up with. I didn't even think that it is something different. And because I didn't like it, I didn't miss it here. But this is what they do. They sprinkle a little bit of perfume in the cities. In the villages, it's the creek or the well. And I know where it came from, because Easter is beginning of the spring, so you have to water the plants so they grow, and they consider the women the flower of the house.
Here people comment that we're very individualistic. And would you say that Slovakian culture is more of communal style culture?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it was before the war, but certainly the socialist regime encouraged the communal sort of socializing. I have been taken part in different social activities, but also in working camps. We have been taken out to build we had to shift the railway lines from one place to the other because they were building the dam of Czechoslovakian youth in middle of Slovakia.
Right.
And we were put together to working parties. And to me, the equality between boys and girls was taken. I didn't see boys different to me. It was all equal. So we were 2 or 3 women in that working party, and the rest of them were boys. And we worked equally hard, or we didn't work equally hard. We greeted each other, we cuddled each other, but there was no difference in our part of the world. There was no difference between boys and girls. If you, eventually when you grew up, you became aware of one or the other boy which you like more. But other than that, even in working places, there was no difference. When we came to Australia, someone told me that women can't lift heavy subjects and all that. It was in Cadbury's that don't do that. The men will put it away. And I thought, oh, that's nice. I didn't know about that. But there is the equality was everywhere, and we were great mates. And I have to say that I went to school with a group of children, and from primary school to the end of the college, which was 12 years, I went more or less with the same kids, and we matriculated together. Even the teachers were kind of more friendly. There was no, Brian was saying that they were being hit by the sticks and everything. There was no punishments.
Yeah.
No punishments at all. That was our ideology. And we were told that we are working for our country and for ourselves. So really, the wages, if you could cover yourself with it, lost importance, at least in our mind. It wasn't the important thing why you worked. You worked for the whole. Yeah. This is how the first generation of socialists used. But I don't know what happened later when I grew up.
Yeah.
It deteriorated, but I know that this was a very good ideology, and people were moral towards each other. People are people, they all feel the same, they all love, they all cry, they all feel sad when something, they all love people around them, and the family is important to them. And this is the common thread, and the traditions and the customs come later, and it just depends where you find yourself, which part of the world.
Yeah.
And this is where you create your sort of customs and traditions and whatever.